The transport ship broke through the clouds of Prime, and Park pressed his face against the small window like a child seeing snow for the first time. Below him, cities made of crystal and light stretched across purple mountains. Rivers of glowing water cut through forests of trees that stood taller than any building on Earth. It was beautiful. It was alien. It was terrifying. "Commander, we're landing in 10 minutes," said from behind him. She was checking her rifle for the 15th time that hour. She always did that when she was nervous, though she would never admit to being nervous about anything. Turned away from the window and looked at his team. 12 humans in total. 12 soldiers sent as a gift from Earth to the Great Confederacy. A token of friendship, the politicians had called it. Knew better. They were test subjects. Guinea pigs sent to see if humans could survive in a galactic war that had been raging for 300 years. They had been fighting the Dominion since before humans had discovered electricity. Entire planets had burned. Billions had died. And now humanity wanted a seat at the table. The price of that seat was 12 soldiers and whatever usefulness they could prove. Lee sat in the corner, sketching something in his worn notebook. He was always drawing. Faces, buildings, alien plants he had never seen before but somehow imagined perfectly. Had looked at his drawings once and felt a strange sadness. Drew like a man who knew he might not live long enough to see the things he imagined. Was sleeping or pretending to sleep. She had been assigned to communications, which meant she would probably never see combat. That was fine with her. She had joined the military to pay for her mother's medical bills, not to become a hero. Was the youngest, 22 years old and already one of the best shooters in the Korean Armed Forces. He sat very still, staring at nothing, his mind somewhere far away. Had seen that look before. It was the look of someone preparing themselves to die. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of the moon, where Outpost Gamma 7 waited for them. When the doors opened, understood for the first time how small humans really were. Admiral stood at the landing pad with 50 soldiers behind him. Each was at least 8 feet tall, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their angular faces. Their skin was the color of storm clouds, and their hands had 6 fingers each. They wore armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal, adjusting to their movements with perfect smoothness. Looked down at the humans with an expression that recognized immediately. It was the same expression a man might give a stray dog that had wandered into his house. Not hatred, not fear, just mild annoyance and a complete lack of interest. "Commander Park," said. His voice was deep and rumbling like thunder in the distance. "Welcome to Outpost Gamma 7. I trust your journey was acceptable." "It was fine, Admiral. Thank you for having us." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I did not have a choice in having you. Your government and mine made arrangements above my rank, but you are here now, so we will make use of you." He turned and began walking toward the main complex. The humans followed, their boots clicking against the metal floor while they moved in complete silence. The outpost was enormous. Corridors stretched in every direction, filled with soldiers and equipment that could not begin to understand. Screens displayed information in a language that looked like music made visible. Machines hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. "Your quarters are in Section 14, said without looking back. "You will be assigned to perimeter patrol starting tomorrow. The work is simple. Even humans should be able to manage it." His hand tightened on her rifle, but she said nothing. Gave her a small shake of his head. "Not now, not yet." They reached a room that was clearly designed for storage, not living. Metal walls, metal floor, metal ceiling. 12 beds had been placed in rows, each one slightly too large for a human body. There were no windows, no decorations, nothing to suggest that anyone cared whether the humans lived or died. "I will send someone to explain your duties in the morning," said. "Until then, stay in your quarters. The other soldiers are not accustomed to your kind. There may be misunderstandings." "Understood, Admiral." Paused at the door. For a moment, something like curiosity flickered in his 4 eyes. "Your people," he said slowly. "You come from a death world, yes. A planet of extreme temperatures, toxic atmosphere, dangerous predators. Earth has some challenges, admitted, but we manage. And yet you are so small, so soft. Your lives are so short." Tilted his head, studying the humans like specimens in a jar. "How did you survive long enough to reach the stars?" Thought about the question. He thought about the ice ages his ancestors had endured, the predators they had hunted to extinction, the diseases they had conquered, the wars they had survived, the atom they had split and the moon they had walked on. "We're stubborn," he said finally. "We don't know how to quit." Made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh. "Stubbornness is not a survival trait, Commander. It is a death wish dressed in pretty words." He left without another word. The human stood in silence for a long moment, then sat down on one of the oversized beds and opened his notebook. "Well," he said quietly, "that went better than I expected." Snorted, "He looks at us like we're insects." "We are insects to them," said. She sat down and began disassembling her rifle, her hands moving with practiced ease. "They've been fighting this war for 300 years. We've been in space for less than 50. To them, we're children playing with toys." "Then we'll show them what children can do," said. His voice was calm and cold. "My grandfather killed Japanese soldiers with a rifle older than this outpost. My father killed North Korean infiltrators in mountains that would freeze a solid. We come from a long line of people who killed things bigger and stronger than themselves." Held up his hand. "Enough. We're not here to prove anything. We're here to learn, to help where we can, and to go home alive. That's all." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. They were here to prove something. They had to prove something. Because if humanity was going to survive in a galaxy full of ancient empires and endless wars, they needed allies. And allies did not respect weakness. That night lay awake on his too large bed, staring at the metal ceiling. Somewhere in the outpost, soldiers were laughing at the small, soft, short-lived humans who had come to play at war. He smiled in the darkness. Let them laugh, he thought. Let them underestimate us. That's always been humanity's greatest advantage. No one ever sees us coming until it's too late. Outside, the twin moons of the planet rose over the horizon, casting silver light across a battlefield that had been soaked in blood for 3 centuries. Somewhere in the darkness, they were watching, waiting, planning. The war was about to change. The just didn't know it yet. The attack came on the 7th day, just before dawn. Park was dreaming of his mother's cooking when the alarms tore him from sleep. Red lights flashed across the metal walls of the human quarters. A voice spoke in the language, fast and urgent, words he could not understand but whose meaning was clear. They were under attack. "Everyone up," he shouted, though his team was already moving. Soldiers did not need to be told twice. They grabbed their weapons and their armor and they ran. The corridors of Outpost Gamma 7 were chaos. Soldiers rushed past in organized groups, their liquid armor shifting and hardening as they moved. Officers shouted orders. Somewhere in the distance, explosions shook the walls. Grabbed a passing by the arm. "What's happening?" The soldier looked down at him with something like pity. The thousands of them, landing craft coming down all across the eastern perimeter. He pulled his arm free. "Stay out of the way, human. This is real war." They found Admiral in the command center, standing before a massive holographic display that showed the battlefield in terrible detail. Red dots swarmed across the map like angry insects. Each dot was a soldier. There were so many dots that parts of the map had turned solid red. Admiral said, "Where do you need us?" Did not look away from the display. "Nowhere. Your weapons are too weak. Your bodies are too fragile. Find a shelter and wait until this is over." "With respect, Admiral, we didn't come here to hide." Now turned. His 4 eyes were cold and hard. With respect, Commander, I do not have time to babysit your people. Every soldier I assign to protect you is a soldier I cannot use against the enemy. Stay out of the way." He turned back to the display and knew the conversation was over. The humans found a position on the western wall, far from the main fighting. From there, they could see the battle unfold across the rocky plains that surrounded the outpost. There were nightmares made flesh. They stood on four legs like insects, but their upper bodies were humanoid, with four arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through metal. Their heads were eyeless, covered instead with hundreds of small holes that detected heat and movement. They did not feel fear. They did not feel pain. They were weapons designed by nature for one purpose only: to kill. Wave after wave of drone soldiers crashed against the outpost's energy shields. The shields held but could see them flickering. They would not hold forever. "There," said, pointing toward the horizon. "Do you see them?" Followed her finger. Far behind the waves of drone soldiers, perhaps 2 kilometers away, mobile fortresses crawled across the landscape. They were massive things, like metal mountains on wheels. And standing on top of those fortresses, directing the battle with signals and commands, were the commanders. "Take out the commanders and the drones lose direction," said quietly. He was sketching the scene in his notebook, his hand moving automatically even as his eyes stayed fixed on the distant targets. "They're a hive mind. The commanders are the brains. The soldiers are just extensions." 2 kilometers, said. "That's a long shot." "Too long for us," admitted, "but maybe not for the—" He was wrong. On the third day of the siege, stood in the command center and watched this best attempt to end the battle. His name was, and he was a legend among his people, 200 years old, 1,000 confirmed kills, the deadliest sniper the Confederacy had ever produced. He carried a rifle that was worth more than most starships, a weapon designed specifically for extreme long-range combat. Set up on the highest point of the outpost, surrounded by spotters and equipment that could not name. He lay there for 6 hours, breathing slowly, calculating angles and wind patterns and 100 other factors. His shot flew true for 800 meters. Then the wind caught it. The atmospheric interference bent it. The bullet missed the commander by a full meter. Tried again and again and again. His best shot landed at 847 meters. Impressive by standards, useless against commanders who stood at twice that distance. "It's hopeless," reported to Admiral that evening. His voice was heavy with shame. "No organic being can make that shot consistently. The atmospheric interference, the wind patterns, the heat distortion. It's simply not possible." The commanders, as if they understood what had happened, moved their fortresses back even further. They now stood at 1,500 meters. They might as well have been on another planet. "Then we wait them out," said. "Our shields will hold, reinforcements will come." "Our supplies will not last that long," one of his officers said quietly. 3 weeks, maybe 4, then we starve." Silence fell over the command center. Looked at his team. Was staring at the holographic display, her eyes tracking the distant commanders with an intensity that he had never seen before. "I can make that shot," she said. Every in the room turned to look at her. Some of them laughed. Others looked offended that a human would dare to speak in such a moment. 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "You with that toy you carry." Unslung her rifle. It was a standard Korean military rifle, designed for combat at ranges of 600 meters or less. Compared to this weapon, it looked like something from a museum. "The weapon isn't the problem," said. "The problem is calculation. Wind, distance, gravity, heat. Your sniper is using machines to calculate all of that. Machines can be wrong." "And you think you can do better?" asked. There was no anger in his voice, only genuine confusion. "I don't think I know," tapped her temple. "We evolved on a planet where we had to throw rocks at animals to survive. where we had to track prey across distances that would kill most species. Our brains are calculating machines. We just don't use computers to do it. We use instinct. Stared at her for a long moment. Then he made that sound that might have been a laugh. Very well, human. If you want to waste ammunition and embarrass yourself, I will not stop you. But when you fail, you will accept that your kind has no place in this war. Agreed. Nodded, and if I succeed, you will listen when we speak. If you succeed at 1,500 meters with that weapon and no enhancement, I will make you an admiral myself. He was joking. Everyone knew he was joking. Was not smiling. That night she sat alone on the western wall, staring at the distant lights of the fortresses. Found her there, her rifle in her lap, her eyes fixed on targets that most could not even see clearly. "Can you really do it?" he asked. Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm and certain. "My grandmother used to hunt rabbits with a sling, just a piece of leather and a stone. She could hit a target at 50 meters without missing once. She taught my mother. My mother taught me." She lifted her rifle and sighted through the scope. "This is just a very complicated sling, Commander, and those commanders are just very large rabbits." Sat beside her and looked out at the battlefield. Somewhere in the darkness, they were preparing for another assault. Somewhere above them, they were writing reports about how the siege could not be broken. "Don't miss," he said. Smiled. It was a predator's smile, sharp and cold. "I never miss." The sun rose red over Outpost Gamma 7 on the fourth day of the siege. They had attacked twice during the night, testing the shields, probing for weakness. The shields had held, but barely. Everyone in the outpost knew that time was running out. Set up her position on the eastern wall as the first light touched the battlefield. She moved slowly, deliberately, like a woman performing a sacred ritual. First, she found the right spot. Not too high, not too low. A place where the wind would be predictable and the angle would be clean. Then she spread out a thin mat and lay down on her stomach, her rifle resting on a small stand made from her backpack. They gathered to watch. At first there were only a few soldiers on patrol who had heard rumors about the human who claimed she could do the impossible. Then more came. Then more. By the time was ready to shoot, there were over 100 standing behind her, their 4 eyes fixed on the small human woman who lay so still she might have been sleeping. Stood at the front of the crowd. His expression was difficult to read, but thought he saw something like hope in those alien eyes. The legendary sniper had failed. If this human could succeed where he could not, perhaps there was still a chance. "She's not even using a spotter," one of them whispered. "She's not using any enhancement at all, just her eyes." "It's a waste of time," another said. "The wind alone will throw off her shot by meters at that range." Admiral arrived as was making her final adjustments. He stood apart from the crowd, his arms crossed over his chest, his 4 eyes narrow with something that was not quite contempt but close to it. "How long will this theater take?" he asked. "As long as it takes." Did not hear them. She did not hear anything. The world had narrowed to a single point of focus, the scope in front of her eyes and the target it revealed. The commander stood on his mobile fortress, 1,847 meters away. She had measured the distance herself, using methods her grandmother had taught her. Methods that did not require machines or computers, just patience and eyes that knew how to see. The commander was tall for a, nearly 3 meters from the ground to the top of his sensory head. He wore armor that covered most of his body, but there was a gap at the neck. There was always a gap at the neck. Armor designers across the galaxy always made the same mistake. They protected the chest and the head, but they forgot that the neck had to move. Breathed in, held it, let it out slowly. The wind was coming from the northwest at approximately 12 kilometers per hour. It would push her bullet to the right. She adjusted her aim to the left. The temperature was falling as the sun rose higher. Cold air was denser than warm air. It would slow her bullet slightly. She adjusted her aim upward by a fraction of a degree. The planet's gravity was slightly stronger than Earth's. Her bullet would drop faster. Another tiny adjustment. She had been making calculations like this since she was 6 years old, first with stones thrown at birds, then with balls thrown at targets, then with rifles aimed at enemies of her country. It was not something she thought about consciously. It was as natural as breathing. Squeeze the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the battlefield. Every held their breath. Every human leaned forward. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen. 1,847 meters away, the commander crumpled. The bullet had passed through the gap in his armor, through his neck, and out the other side. He was dead before he hit the ground. Silence, complete, absolute silence. Then fired again. A second commander fell, then a third. 3 shots in 11 seconds, 3 kills at a range that they considered impossible. The silence broke. Soldiers began shouting, pointing, demanding to know what had happened. Some of them were laughing in disbelief. Others were staring at like she had just performed a miracle. Admiral pushed through the crowd. His 4 eyes were wide, and for the first time since had met him, he looked genuinely shocked. "How?" he demanded. "How is this possible? You have no targeting computer, no wind sensor, no thermal scanner. How did you calculate all of those factors?" Sat up slowly, cradling her rifle in her arms. She looked tired, but there was a small smile on her face. "I didn't calculate anything," she said. "Not consciously. My brain did it for me." That's not possible. The variables are too complex. The margin for error is too small." For a maybe, stood and faced the Admiral. She was so small compared to him, a child standing before a giant, but in that moment she did not look small at all. "Humans evolved differently, Admiral. We come from a world where survival meant throwing rocks at prey and predators, where our ancestors had to judge distance and wind and movement in a fraction of a second or they would die." She tapped her temple. "This is not just a brain. This is a targeting computer that has been refined by millions of years of evolution. Every human has one. We use it to throw balls, to drive cars, to catch things that fall. We use it so often that we forget it's there. But it's always working, always calculating, always ready." Stepped forward. The legendary sniper looked at with something that might have been respect. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple for us," glanced at. "Tell them, Commander." Cleared his throat. Every eye was on him now. "On Earth," he said, "we have games where the entire point is to throw objects at targets. We do it for fun. Children as young as 5 years old can throw a ball and hit a target across a field. By the time we are adults, we can calculate trajectories without thinking about it. We do it automatically." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You asked which one of us was the designated sniper. The answer is none of them, and all of them. Any human with working eyes and steady hands can do what just did. Some are better than others, but the ability itself, that's just part of being human." Admiral was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to look at the battlefield, where the forces had fallen into confusion. Without their commanders, the drone soldiers were wandering aimlessly, crashing into each other, failing to coordinate their attacks. "Your grandmother," said slowly, "the one who hunted rabbits with a sling, how far could she throw?" Smiled. 50 meters with a stone, when she was 80 years old. "And you are, how old?" 32. Made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh, but this time there was no mockery in it, only wonder. "I believe," he said, "that I owe you an apology, Sergeant, and perhaps a promotion." The crowd of soldiers parted as he walked back toward the command center. Before he left, he turned one last time. "Commander Park, how many of your soldiers can shoot like this?" Thought about who could draw a perfect circle freehand. About who had been shooting since he was old enough to hold a rifle. about who had once caught a fly with chopsticks just to prove she could. All of them, Admiral, every single one. Nodded slowly. His 4 eyes blinked in that way that now recognized as deep thought. Then perhaps, he said, it is time we stop treating you like children. He walked away, and for the first time since they had arrived at Outpost Gamma 7, the humans felt like they belonged. Word spread through Outpost Gamma 7 like fire through dry grass. The humans could shoot. Not just shoot, but shoot at ranges that considered impossible. Shoot without computers. Shoot without enhancement. Shoot with nothing but their eyes and their strange, soft brains. By the 5th day of the siege, everything had changed. Admiral assigned all 12 humans to sniper positions along the eastern wall. He gave them the best ammunition the outpost had. He assigned spotters to each human, not to help them aim, but to confirm their kills and report back to command. The snipers watched from nearby, trying to understand how these small creatures did what they did. Lee turned out to be even better than the quiet artist who spent his free time drawing had hands that never trembled. His eye could track the smallest movement at incredible distances. On the 5th day of the siege, he made a shot that would become legend across the Confederacy. They had learned to fear the humans. Their commanders had moved back to 2,000 meters, then 2,100 meters. They thought they were safe. They thought that surely no organic being could reach them at such a distance. Lay on the eastern wall for 3 hours. He did not move. He barely breathed. His spotter, a young named, watched him with growing unease. The wind is shifting, said. The thermal patterns are unstable. You should wait. Did not respond. His eye was pressed to the scope, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He was not looking at the wind or the thermals. He was looking at his target, a commander standing on a mobile fortress 2,134 meters away. The shot is impossible, said. Even with computer assistance, the margin of error is too great. You will miss. Smiled. It was a strange smile, peaceful and certain. My grandfather, he said softly, used to paint on rice grains, perfect images smaller than a fingernail. He said the secret was not to think, just to let your hands do what they already know how to do. He squeezed the trigger. The commander fell. Stared through his magnification device. The shot had struck the commander in the exact center of his sensory head, a perfect hit at a distance that should have been impossible. Hal whispered, was already adjusting his aim for the next target. The same way I draw, he said. I see where the line should go and I put it there. The distance doesn't matter. The wind doesn't matter. All that matters is the line. On the other side of the wall, Corporal was proving that, and were not exceptions. Had been assigned to communications. She had never been a soldier. Her job was to manage radios and coordinate messages between units. But when the siege began, she had asked Commander Park for a rifle. I grew up on a farm, she had explained. My family couldn't afford to waste bullets on hunting, so we used slings, like's grandmother. I could hit a bird at 30 meters when I was 12 years old. Now she lay on the northern section of the wall, her rifle aimed at a squad of scouts trying to approach the outpost's shield generators. The scouts were moving quickly, using cover, trying to stay hidden. It didn't matter. Tracked them the way her eyes had tracked birds in the fields of her childhood. She saw their patterns. She predicted their movements. When they paused to check their surroundings, she fired. 6 scout, 6 shot, 6 kills. The soldier beside her stared at her in amazement. You didn't even use the scope for the last 3. Shrugged. They were close, only 400 meters. I could see them fine without it. 400 meters is close. On Earth, a professional baseball player can throw a ball at 150 kilometers per hour and hit a target the size of a hand. 400 meters is nothing. The soldier had no idea what baseball was, but he decided not to ask. By the sixth day, the commanders had moved their fortresses back to 3,000 meters. They thought they were finally safe. 3 kilometers. It was the maximum effective range of even the most advanced sniper rifles with full computer assistance. No organic being could possibly reach them at such a distance. Private accepted the challenge. Was the youngest of the human team, but he had been shooting longer than anyone except. His father had been a competitive shooter. His grandfather had been a sniper in a war that most of the galaxy had never heard of. Shooting was in his blood. He set up on the highest point of the outpost, a tower that gave him a clear view of the entire battlefield. He brought water, food, and a notebook filled with calculations that he had made himself. Then he waited. He waited for 6 hours. The who watched him grew bored and left. Even the other humans thought he was wasting his time. 3 kilometers was simply too far. The bullet would drop too much. The wind would push it too far off course. The target would move before it arrived. But had done the math. He had studied the wind patterns for days. He had measured the planet's gravity, its atmospheric density, its temperature variations. He had calculated exactly where his bullet would go if he fired at exactly the right moment. The right moment came at 4:47 in the afternoon, when the wind briefly calmed, and the primary general stepped out onto the platform of his fortress to survey the battlefield. Fired. The bullet flew for nearly 4 seconds. It dropped more than 15 meters during its flight. The wind pushed it nearly 3 meters to the right, but had accounted for all of that. He had aimed where the general would be, not where he was. The bullet struck the general in his left eye. The forces fell into chaos. The general had been coordinating the entire siege. Without him, the drone soldiers had no unified command. They began attacking randomly, crashing into each other, wandering away from the battlefield entirely. Admiral found Commander Park in the mess hall an hour later. The Admiral looked different. The contempt was gone from his eyes. In its place was something that recognized fear. "Your people," said slowly, "are terrifying." Was eating a ration bar. It tasted like cardboard, but it would keep him alive. "We get that a lot," he said. 3 kilometers. Your private killed a general at 3 kilometers with a weapon designed for 1/5 that range. How? I told you, Admiral, we're persistence predators. Our ancestors survived by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We hunted mammoths with sharpened sticks. We killed wolves with rocks. Distance has never stopped us. He finished his ration bar and stood. They made the same mistake everyone makes when they meet humans. They looked at us and saw small, soft, short-lived creatures. They assumed we were weak. They forgot that we come from a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We survived not because we were strong, but because we refused to die. Was silent for a long moment. Then he asked a question that had been waiting for since they arrived. If you can do this with rifles, what else can you do? Smiled. He thought about marathon runners who could run for days without stopping, about divers who could hold their breath for 10 minutes, about climbers who scaled frozen mountains just because they were there. Admiral, he said, we're still figuring that out ourselves, but I promise you this, whatever you think humans are capable of, you're underestimating us. He walked away, leaving the Admiral alone with his thoughts. Outside, the forces were retreating, their command structure shattered, their morale broken by enemies they had dismissed as insects. The siege of Outpost Gamma 7 was almost over, and across the galaxy, the story of what the humans had done was just beginning to spread. The siege of Outpost Gamma 7 broke on the 9th day. They had lost every commander above the rank of squad leader. Without their leaders, the drone soldiers were nothing more than confused animals. They wandered the battlefield in circles, attacking rocks and shooting at shadows. Some of them simply stopped moving and stood like statues, waiting for orders that would never come. When the counterattack began, it was less a battle than a cleanup. The drone soldiers were slaughtered by the thousands. The mobile fortresses, abandoned by their crews, were captured or destroyed. By sunset, the forces had retreated completely, fleeing back to their landing craft and escaping into the sky. The outpost had been saved, and everyone knew who had saved it. Admiral submitted his report to High Command 3 days after the siege ended. He included every detail: the impossible shots, the ranges achieved, the complete destruction of the command structure. He attached video footage from the spotters and testimony from his own soldiers. He made sure there could be no doubt about what had happened. The report was flagged for review. Then it was flagged again. It was passed up the chain of command until it reached the desk of High Admiral, the supreme commander of all military forces. Read the report 3 times. Then he summoned Admiral to appear before the War Council. The chamber was vast, filled with the most powerful military leaders in the Confederacy. They sat in a circle around a central platform where stood alone, his 4 eyes steady despite the weight of their attention. "You are telling us," High Admiral said slowly, "that these humans can do what our best snipers cannot, that they can hit targets at 3 kilometers without computer assistance, that any human can learn to do this." "Yes, High Admiral." "And you expect us to believe this?" Gestured to the display screen behind him. The footage began to play, making her first shot, impossible kill, striking the general at 3 kilometers. The room was silent as the evidence unfolded. "I did not believe it either," said when the footage ended. "I thought they were exaggerating. I thought their confidence was foolishness. I was wrong." The War Council murmured among themselves. Some looked skeptical. Others looked afraid. A few looked excited, seeing possibilities that had never existed before. "How is this possible?" one of the council members asked. "Humans have no genetic enhancement, no neural implants. Their technology is primitive compared to ours." "They evolved differently," explained. "Their world required them to hunt prey at long distances. Their brains developed to calculate trajectories automatically. What takes our snipers years of training and expensive equipment comes naturally to them." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "They consider it recreational. They have competitions where they throw balls at targets for entertainment. Their children play games based entirely on hand-eye coordination. What we consider an elite military skill, they consider a basic ability that any child should possess." The silence that followed was profound. Across the Confederacy, the story spread like fire. Soldiers told their families. Officers wrote reports. News organizations picked up the story and broadcast it across 1,000 worlds. Within weeks, every species in the Confederacy knew about the humans who could shoot without computers. Human soldiers became the most requested addition to any military unit. Commanders who had once rejected human contingents now begged for them. The small, soft, short-lived creatures from the death world called Earth had proven their worth in a way that no one could deny. The Dominion watched these developments with growing alarm. For 300 years, they had fought to a standstill. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm the enemy with numbers, protect the commanders at impossible ranges, and wait for victory through attrition. The humans had destroyed that strategy in 9 days. 3 months after the siege of Outpost Gamma 7, the Dominion requested peace talks. It was the first time in 3 centuries that they had asked for negotiations. The treaty was signed on a neutral space station. Diplomats sat on one side of the table. Diplomats sat on the other. And standing quietly in the corner, watching everything with curious eyes, was Commander Park and his team. After the ceremony, a diplomat approached Park. The creature was ancient, its exoskeleton faded with age, its movements slow and careful, but its voice was strong. "We must know," they said. "If all humans can shoot like this, what else can you do?" Park thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about marathon runners who could cover 100 kilometers without stopping, about free divers who descended to crushing depths on a single breath, about mountain climbers who scaled frozen peaks where the air was too thin to breathe. He thought about the human capacity for spite, for stubbornness, for refusing to quit simply because the universe said they should. He thought about the soldiers who had survived prisoner camps through sheer willpower, about the explorers who had walked to the poles of their world and back, about the scientists who had split the atom and walked on the moon. Honestly, Park said finally, we're still figuring that out ourselves. The diplomat stared at him for a long moment. Then it made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sigh of defeat. Your species is very young, it said. You have been among the stars for less than a century. You do not know yet what you are capable of, but we have watched you, we have studied you, and we have decided something. What's that? We do not wish to be your enemy when you finally discover your limits. We do not think you have any. The diplomat walked away, leaving Park alone with his thoughts. 6 months later was awarded the Star of Valor, the highest military honor in the Confederacy. She was the first human to receive it. At the ceremony, she stood before a crowd of thousands, a small woman surrounded by giants, and accepted the medal with quiet dignity. When the ceremony ended, she returned to Earth. She had done her duty. She had proven what humans could do. Now she wanted to go home. She took up competitive shooting. It seemed like the natural thing to do. She entered tournaments and won some and lost some. In the planetary championships, she placed third. An interviewer asked her why she hadn't won gold. Shrugged, the guy who won was better, that's all. The interviewer pressed further. But you're a war hero. You made impossible shots. You helped end a 300-year war. Was quiet for a moment. She thought about her grandmother and the sling, about the birds in the fields of her childhood, about the commander falling at 1,847 meters. Nothing's impossible, she said finally. You just need eyes and patience. Any human knows that. The interviewer nodded and moved on to the next question. She didn't understand what really meant. How could she? She had grown up in a galaxy that thought humans were weak, that thought their short lives and soft bodies made them inferior. She didn't understand that humans had been throwing rocks at problems since before they could speak, that they had looked at mammoths and thought, I can kill that, that they had looked at the moon and thought, I can walk on that, that they had looked at the stars and thought, I can reach those. Distance had never stopped them. Doubt had never stopped them. Even death had never really stopped them, because there was always another human ready to pick up where the last one fell. On Outpost Gamma 7, a monument had been built. It was small by standards, just a simple pillar of stone with names carved into it. 12 names, 12 humans who had changed the course of a war. Soldiers stopped there sometimes to read the names and remember. They told stories about the humans who could shoot without computers, about the small, soft creatures who had looked at an impossible distance and said, I can reach that. The stories spread, they changed, they grew, but the core remained the same. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not inferior. Humanity was something that the galaxy had never seen before. Something that refused to know its limits. Something that threw rocks at gods and somehow won. And somewhere in a small house on Earth, an old woman named sat on her porch and watched the stars. She thought about her grandmother and the sling, about the war and the siege and the shots that had seemed impossible. She smiled. Any human with eyes, she whispered to the darkness. Any human with eyes. The stars twinkled back at her, and somewhere among them, the galaxy was learning what it meant to be human.